and then a little bit of developmental stuff. It's section 8 of your chapter. So the autonomic nervous system is, again, part of the peripheral nervous system. It functions without conscious effort, controlling visceral activities, things such as smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Helps very important in maintaining homeostasis over the long term, help the body respond to stress, preparing us for exercise, intense physical activity, even day-to-day things the autonomic nervous system maintains homeostasis for. Some general characteristics: the afferent nerve fibers transmit signals from the viscera and skin to the central nervous system. Motor fibers send impulses along two afferent nerve fibers, which synapse in the ganglia outside the central nervous system. Muscles or glands that respond to nerve impulses will contract, secrete, or inhibit. So this is, again, a point the autonomic nervous system can turn effectors up or turn effectors down. It's got two different divisions based on that. The sympathetic division prepares the body for fight or flight situations, speeds up. This is the turn up side. It's most active under energy requiring stressful emergency situations. The parasympathetic, on the other hand, prepares the body for resting and digesting, slowing things down. This is the one that tends to turn things down. Now, both of those are oversimplifications, and there are some organs that need to be turned down in the event of fight or flight, and some that need to be turned up even when it's resting and digesting. So most organs will receive input from both divisions, not all, but most. The autonomic nervous fiber neurons are, here we go. Somatic motor fibers link the central nervous system to the skeletal muscle through one neuron. The autonomic motor pathway contains two neurons, so somatic is one, autonomic is two. There's a preganglionic fiber and a postganglionic fiber. Sorry, I got confused there for a minute. Axons from the preganglionic fiber, their cell bodies are within the central nervous system. They talk to a cell body that is outside the central nervous system. That is in the ganglia, and then its fibers will go from the cell bodies in the ganglia to the visceral effector. In the sympathetic division, also called the thoracolumbar division because it goes from T1 to L2, preganglionic fibers originate within the spinal cord, leave via ventral roots, leave the spinal nerves through white rami, and enter the synaptic chain or the paravertebral ganglia. That sympathetic chain, that was sympathetic chain before that too. Ganglia and fibers connect to make up the sympathetic trunk. Sympathetic chain ganglia lie some distance from the viscera they regulate. They are closer to the central nervous system than the target organ. That's going to be different in our next division. So the collateral ganglia in the abdomen are close to the large blood vessels, for example. So we have a short preganglionic neuron and a long postganglionic neuron. In the sympathetic division, those preganglionic fibers synapse with postganglionic neurons in the paravertebral ganglia, or continue through a paravertebral ganglia and synapse at another sympathetic ganglia, or pass through to a collateral ganglia and synapse there. The postganglionic fibers extend from the sympathetic ganglia to the effector organ. Postganglionic fibers that originate at the paravertebral ganglia usually pass through gray rami and return to a spinal nerve before proceeding to the effector. There is an exception: preganglionic fibers that pass through the sympathetic ganglia and extend to the adrenal medulla. They terminate on hormone-secreting cells that will release epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's the sympathetic division. In the parasympathetic division, which is also called the craniosacral division, the preganglionic neurons originate in the brainstem and S2 to S4 at the spine. The preganglionic fibers extend out the cranial or sacral nerves to terminal ganglia, which are near the visceral organs. So in this case, we have a long preganglionic neuron and a short postganglionic neuron. Preganglionic fibers of the head are included in ocular motor, facial, and glossopharyngeal nerves. Preganglionic fibers of the thorax and abdomen are part of the vagus nerve, and preganglionic fibers of the sacral region and spinal cord carry impulses to the pelvic viscera. So here is our parasympathetic division. Notice it's got cranial and sacral. Thoracic, lumbar was sympathetic. There are a number of neurotransmitters involved in the autonomic nervous system. Cholinergic neurons release acetylcholine, and all the preganglionic sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers use acetylcholine. The postganglionic parasympathetic fibers also use acetylcholine. Adrenergic nerves are those that release norepinephrine or noradrenaline, and most of the postganglionic sympathetic fibers use are adrenergic neurons, norepinephrine. The actions that result from binding to a receptor in the membrane is what causes the effects at the junction. So in a cholinergic receptor, we have two different kinds. One acetylcholine, two different kinds of receptors. The muscarinic receptors are excitatory. They slow. It takes longer for them to get going. And also activated by a fungal toxin called muscarine, which is why they are called muscarinic receptors. Nicotinic receptors are also acetylcholine receptors. They are excitatory, very rapid, and they are also activated by the toxin nicotine, which is why they're called nicotinic receptors. So we have one acetylcholine and two different types of receptors. There are also two different types of receptors for epinephrine and norepinephrine. Alpha and beta receptors, and each will elicit different responses on various target organs. After the synapse is done, we've got the enzyme acetylcholinesterase that decomposes acetylcholine, and norepinephrine from adrenergic fibers is removed by active transport and then inactivated by an enzyme within the cells called monoamine oxidase. The control of the autonomic activity is largely under the control of the hypothalamus. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system is involuntary. The medulla oblongata is going to regulate cardiac, vasomotor, and respiratory activities. The hypothalamus will regulate visceral functions like body temperature, thirst, electrolyte balance. Autonomic reflex centers in the medulla oblongata and spinal cord. There are also reflex centers in the medulla oblongata that control cardiac, vasomotor, and respiratory activities. And the limbic system and cerebral cortex will handle the emotional responses. Over the course of our lifetime, there are changes that occur in the central nervous system. Brain cells begin to die before birth, a process called apoptosis, which is part of normal cell death. Over our average lifetime, the brain shrinks about 10%. More gray matter is lost, cell body, than white matter. And many cells die in the temporal lobes, but very few in the brainstem. By age 90, the frontal cortex has lost about half of its neuron. The branches of the cerebral cortex decrease. And changes in sleep patterns occur. Again, as far as I'm concerned, it's still better than the alternative. Okay, so that wraps up the brain and peripheral nervous systems.